I will open us in prayer, and I will begin with the reading from Leviticus 26. So this is the covenant blessings being read, starting in verse 9, ending in verse 12. So I will turn to you, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and confirm my covenant with you. You will eat the old grain of the previous year, and will clear out the old to make room for the new. I will place my residence among you, and I will not reject you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. Dear God, we come to you today as your people. We come to you today as your chosen. Not for anything that we have done, but because you first chose us. We thank you and praise you for just counting us among your flock. Dear Lord, as we study your covenants today, open our hearts to your promises. Let us see and rest in the assurance of what you, the unending, unchanging, immortal, invisible God, have promised to do, and that we can rest in these promises. In Jesus' name. Morning, everybody. Morning. All right. So I'm going to start with something that I should have been doing for the past couple weeks, and I remembered it a couple minutes ago, and I am obviously not as prepared for it as I would want to. I'm going to send around, so usually if I remember to do this, I bring a clipboard. Didn't do that. I'm going to send around a quick sign-up sheet for the email list. So there's many of you here who have been attending, but you're not I know you're not on my email list, and so every week I send out links to the videos, sometimes reminders for, hey, here's the link if you want to join via Zoom. So just getting those weekly updates, especially if you miss and if you want easy access to the videos, it's helpful to be on there. So if you are not receiving emails and you would like to, go ahead and put your email and name on here. If you are currently receiving the emails, you're on my list. You don't need to fill it out. If you're like, I don't want any more email from this guy, more than 0, then just skip it. It's fine. But here, I'll just, I'll send this around.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
The
The Bible right there is a house Bible.
Okay.
So that's, if I just give you a sheet of paper, I can tear right through it. And Kristen, if it gets back to you, if you'd be able to hold on to that, that'd be perfect. Okay. So, good morning. We're continuing our series on the Old Testament in today's world. Today is going to be one of my my personal favorite topics, which is the covenants in the Old Testament. So we're actually going to spend maybe 2 weeks on the covenants. But this one here I'm calling the covenants and the promises of God. We're going to be focusing on the promises of God that come through in the covenants. And we are going to be doing that as soon as my clicker remembers that it's supposed to be connected. So, and if not, I can just, how about, okay, good. So, yeah, what we'll be covering today. So first I'm going to give a definition of covenant. It's going to be a long, somewhat involved definition, but I'll go through every part of it. But I think it's important, each aspect of those details is important. Then we're going to look at the covenants that contain the promises of God. And we're going to look at what those promises are. And then lastly, and those of you who are going to leave for choir are just going to have to see this discussion after the fact. So, because I'm resigned to the fact that I am not going to get to this before you have to leave. But we're going to ask the question, why did God use a covenant to relate to people? So what is the purpose behind that? And it's going to take us back to the ancient Near East a little bit. All right. So the question, what is a covenant? So the definition that I'm giving you here. Okay. So I just got an email from someone who is on the call, I believe, and I was, they're not able to get in. Okay. So what is a covenant? Here's my very long definition for you. This definition comes from Dr. Dan Lane. This is from his PhD dissertation on covenants. Ryan, why are you using an obscure definition for a PhD dissertation? He was my Old Testament professor. So, but I like this definition. So, a covenant is a lifelong, unchangeable, solemn agreement between two designated parties in which one or both make an oath-bound pledge to the other to perform a specified commitment or else suffer the wrath of God. So this is not intended to be just a Bible definition of covenant. This is going to apply to all your ancient Near Eastern covenants as well. And for the most part, it's going to apply even to covenantal relationships that we would talk about today. So here, let's go through, if I can wake this up again. Yeah, all right, so each part of these is deliberate. You wouldn't make a definition this long with this many caveats if you didn't think each one of them mattered to specify it. So lifelong, so that means it's not set aside or annulled until one of the parties dies. So as soon as you enter into a covenant, as long as you both shall live, that covenant is in place. If that is not the case, it's not a covenant. Unchangeable, in the words of the genie from Aladdin, no substitutions, extensions, or refunds. So it's in place, and that agreement, when you enter into it, that is a lifelong agreement, and that agreement is not going to change. There are not provisions for amendments to a covenantal agreement. Solemn, so not entered into lightly. You can kind of see that with the lifelong and unchanging. You know, if I'm going to be like in my 20s and I'm going to enter into a lifelong unchanging agreement, then, you know, you shouldn't take something like that lightly. I'm not in my 20s anymore, even though I probably look like I'm in my teens. Binding agreement. This one's important. There is an or else attached to the covenants. So, is there a way to actually prevent somebody from breaking a covenant? No. So it's not binding in the sense that it is physically impossible to do anything other. It's binding in the sense that there are consequences if the covenant is broken. So a lifelong, unchangeable, solemn binding agreement between two designated parties. So this is not transferred to successors. So in the ancient Near East, this mattered a little bit more. It actually is going to matter very much theologically for us next week. But if you have a covenant between King A and King B dies, King B's son comes to the throne, that covenant is not in place anymore. You would need a new covenant at that point. Ooh, that's a term we've heard before, new covenant, interesting. We'll just put a bookmark there. So in which one or both make an oath-bound pledge to the other to perform a specific commitment. So at the heart of every covenant is an oath. And you can see that again, like this is a solemn binding agreement. There is a pledge, a promise. This isn't like a handshake, right? This is a very strong commitment. And then, or else suffer the wrath of God. So there is a divine witness to the covenant, and there is divine enforcement built into the covenant. So, lifelong, unchangeable, solemn binding agreement between two designated parties in which one or both make an oath-bound pledge to the other to perform a specified commitment or else suffer the wrath of God. I did, in fact, have to be able to recite that verbatim on my exam. Yes?
How long did it take you to make that slide?
I came up with that right before I did the video yesterday. It was, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes, just because I kept having to click like new text box, copy, and then kept moving the animations around. So, okay. So fundamentally, a covenant is an agreement. It represents a new stage in the relationship between two parties. So things are different after the covenant than before. And another feature of them, they're entered into by choice. If it's imposed, it's not a covenant. It might be something, but you wouldn't call it a covenant if there's imposition.
Somebody's in the waiting room.
I think I just got our waiting room cleared out. Looks good to me. I'm able to do it from right here. So now to be sure, even though it's entered into by choice, sometimes that choice is, you might call it a forced choice. So in the ancient Near East, here's how these covenants, at least a particular kind of covenant, would go. Army would come, would surround your city. You would look and be like, my, that army is bigger than mine. There's not much that I could do about what that army is about to do to me. And they send somebody into the city. They're like, hi, I represent the army that's surrounding your city. So as you probably figured out by now, we're bigger than you. So here's a choice. We could come in and flatten your city and take all your stuff, or we could enter into a covenantal agreement where you agree to pay me tribute, on a regular basis, and we let you be. And they're like, it's a hard choice. And so, so covenants can be entered into, and you see historical precedent for this, under duress. But you still are making a choice. In the Bible, these are take it or leave it offers. These are not negotiated, but they're still fundamentally agreed upon. So, even though like God comes out and says, like, I'm making a covenant with you, like Abraham, I'm making a covenant with you and your descendants. I mean, Abraham wasn't magically transported to Canaan at that moment. Abraham did have to go. David was told you're going to have a son. Well, I mean, David could have, I guess, spitefully decided not to have any further children. I mean, why would you, though? You just got this promise from God. That sounds pretty cool. But these are fundamentally entered into by choice. So what's the closest thing we can think of in modern days to a covenant?
Contract.
Okay. A contract has some features of a covenant, but is that a lifelong solemn binding agreement? Marriage. That would be the closest thing that we have culturally to a covenant. So you have, as long as we both shall live. That's part of the, traditional marriage vows. This is as opposed to like when the work is done, or like I don't want to, be a part of this organization anymore. Unchangeable. So this is, again, the traditional vows for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, sickness and in health. There aren't any amendment provisions to a marriage covenant. The oath-bound pledge, heck, we even call them vows. So that is we recognize the solemnity of marriage as opposed to, hey, I just signed up for the Columbia Book Club. Or I joined, the Bible Geeks mailing list. Like, this is a big ceremony. People show up. And there's the pledge that's witnessed by others. I will say suffer the wrath of God was probably not in your marriage vows or in your mortgage contract. So not everything is the same. But we do, at least in Christian theology, we talk about the consequences to, marriage contracts that go awry or marriage covenants that go awry. So, but it's not exactly like the blessings and curses of Deuteronomy. So that's an example of, a covenant as opposed to just an agreement. 3 different types of covenants in the ancient Near East. The Bible's going to have 2 of them. The first one, and these are the ones we're going to focus on today, are called promissory covenants. Most of the covenants in the Bible are promissory covenants. So this is when, and there's not nearly as many of these in the ancient Near East as one we're going to see in a bit, but this is when a stronger party freely gives something to a lesser party. So a royal grant would be another way that they're described. Land grant was the most common in the ancient Near East. If there was a covenant from a stronger to a lesser party, it often involved the bequest of land. A parity contract, covenant, I keep trying to say they're different, but I keep using that word again. And you won't find examples of this in the Bible. This is kind of a trade covenant. So 2 mutually equal parties are joining into a covenantal relationship with each other. Again, like why you would choose to engage in a mutual, lifelong, solemn, binding agreement for trade is an interesting question, but it did happen sometimes. And then the last one would be the vassal covenant. This we're going to talk about next week. So this is when a stronger party imposes obligations on a lesser party. This is kind of that arrangement that I talked about. Hi, I'm the member of the stronger army surrounding your city, and if you'd like to remain alive as opposed to destroyed, you'll give me tribute. The Romans were great at this. That was, very much how the Roman Empire operated. They honestly didn't care that much what you did in your area, but you would help the Roman soldiers, you would pay tribute to Rome, and you would be loyal to the emperor, and you could kind of do what you wanted to do aside from that. So this is, you may have heard the word suzerain treaty or suzerain vassal treaty. That's what these are. And so there is an example of that in the Bible as well. In the ancient world, covenants were ratified in a ritual that conveyed their seriousness or solemnity. And typically there was a meal that would follow thereafter. Does anybody know what went along with that ratification ritual. Paul has talked about it from the pulpit a couple times, which is the only reason I feel like it's fair to ask the question.
Like animals and split in half.
Yep,
You
yep.
walk in the middle. and-
Animals split in half, walk in the middle. And what's the significance of that?
If you don't follow through, that's what's gonna happen to you.
Bingo, that's exactly right. That is, indeed, if either of us breaks this covenant, then let what happens to these animals happen to us. So they do the animal sacrifice, they split them, and then the two parties, or the representatives of the two parties, walk in between, and that is part of that, the ratification ceremony. And then they eat the animals. And that's sort of a significance of the joining of them together. Okay, covenants in the Bible. Can we name some? Moses,
Abraham.
Abraham, Noah, David. One more. New covenant. There we go. Good. Like you guys. So yeah, you have Noah in Genesis 9. Abraham's covenant is a little bit progressive. You get the terms in Genesis 12. You get the ratification in Genesis 15. You get the sign of the covenant in Genesis 17. Sinai, Mosaic covenant. I call it the Sinai covenant because that's how I learned it, but the Mosaic covenant is, yes, exactly the same. Davidic covenant, and then the new covenant. So there's a lot to say about the new covenant. I will not cover that in this class because we're doing Old Testament theology. And there's so much that we can talk about with the new covenant, but I like focusing on the Old Testament stuff because we're not as familiar with it.
You can go back to your recorded previous.
Yes, I did one, and I've been able to borrow a lot of the material for this too, which is great. All right, so one of these is not like the others. Which one is it? Which one's different?
Abraham.
Sinai.
I have one vote for Abraham, I have one vote for Sinai.
The new covenant.
The new covenant, ooh, I have a vote for new.
I would say no.
So great, so we've got a vote for everything except David. Let me add a little bit of clarity to my question. So I gave you three categories of covenants. I gave you promise, I gave you parity, and I gave you vassal covenant. So in using those categories, all of these but one are of the same category, and there's one that's different.
Abraham.
Mark doubles down on Abraham. Abraham is which one and what are the others?
That's the first one you said, I forgot what the name of the first one was.
So the promise?
The promise, yeah.
And the rest are the,
And one for.
okay, the vassal treaty?
Yeah.
So in this one, for the difference between a promissory and a vassal is going to be the if statement. If you do this, then I will do that. But if you don't do this, then this will happen to you. Which one does that sound like? The if this, then that. So let's think of Noah. Was there an if then statement with Noah? Yeah.
Really, the stronger party agreeing.
Exactly. Yeah. How about the the new covenant? Is there an if this then that statement there? Maybe that one's not fair. That one's a little complicated. So what we'll see for the sake of me getting to the rest of it, the one that resembles the Hittite vassal treaty, the book of Deuteronomy actually is structured in the same way as Hittite vassal covenants. So that one is a suzerain treaty. The rest are promises where God is unilaterally making a promise without any oath taken by the humans. So in all of these covenants, except for one, the only oath that's being taken is an oath of God. In the Sinai covenant, there was an oath also taken by the human parties.
That's a question though, with the Abrahamic, since they did that split animal walk down the middle and Abraham did that, doesn't that signify that he's agreeing?
He did not.
Did Abraham do it?
Oh, he didn't?
Abraham did not.
Oh my God.
Slept through it.
He slept through it. Yep. He literally slept through it. It was actually in the vision.
That's
Yeah.
Genesis 15.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that is the important part. That's how you know in that case. Right. So The Sinai covenant we're going to cover next week when we cover the theology of the law, because the Sinai covenant and the law go, hand in hand together. And like, what's the theological significance of that law? And then the new covenant I said is going to be for another class. So we will talk about promises of God and the promissory covenants in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about Noah, Abraham, and David. So I'm going to open here with the Noahic covenant, and I'll ask all of you in the back to read that. All right. So obviously that was a joke. So Genesis chapter 9. And I truncated this a little bit, but starting in verse 9. So then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark." Okay, so when God says, "I'm establishing my covenant with you," you might think, oh, there's a covenant. So I will establish my covenant with you, we have it again, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign that I will make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of flesh. And all the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh."
Okay, question.
Yes.
This goes beyond one person's life.
So, correct. The parties in this case are who?
Noah
And
and his son.
God
Yeah.
in the whole world.
God and everything that will ever come. So if like all living things ever, forever and ever and ever, amen, is the named party. So it is a promise to Noah, but it's a promise to Noah's descendants and to their descendants and to their descendants and
And
so
to
on.
the animals.
And to the animals, correct. So in this case, like you have the designated parties, but the designated parties are all living creatures that will ever live forever. So you work with contracts. You know that you can do it that way if you want. So this one here constitutes a specific promise of God, which is that, and this is very specific, will not flood the earth again to destroy the earth or to destroy all the creatures in the earth. Now, is there any condition here upon Noah and his descendants?
No.
Right. There is, the only oath is, I'm not going to flood the earth and destroy everything again. Does it say that this will one day expire?
No.
Correct.
He
Is there
does
a question?
some rules about not eating meat that has its lifeblood in it.
That's a little bit later, right?
That's in Genesis 9.
I don't think though that is listed as a condition of not flooding the earth again. Yeah. Those are separate. It's not like, but if you eat the animal with the lifeblood in it, then I will flood the earth again. Because you see that with the Sinai covenant. If you obey, then this will happen blessings. If you do not obey, then curses. And that's a feature of the vassal covenants. All right, I'm saying two indulgent theological points before we move on. Not indulgences in that way. It is Reformation Sunday after all.
Come on.
Right. So God used a great flood to destroy the earth. Okay, so water covers the earth. Water rises up above everything. It's just, a ball of water again. When was the last time water covered the whole earth?
Creation.
Creation. We talked about this last week. This is a return to pre-creation. This is starting over. This is a recreation moment. The waters of chaos are now back. Remember, it started with the waters. We talked about this last week. And then the waters are separated, and then the waters pull back, and you have the land, and then everything comes on the land. Now what happened? The waters are covering it again, except for Noah and the animals that were there, and then the waters ebb back, the land is there, and then we have a starting over, a new recreation moment. And what command is given to Noah? Does anybody remember what Noah is told to do? Be fruitful and multiply. Who else was told to be fruitful and multiply? Oh, it's the same command. So there's a question, with God starting over, are the rules changing? Is the relationship between God and humanity changing? And the answer here is no. That in fact, Noah and his family are given the same charge as Adam and Eve. So the charge for humans is the same after Noah versus before Noah.
But there are no trees
There are
and no garden.
Uh,
So we're not
correct.
doing.
Creation is not identical.
Right,
But the relationship between God and humanity has only changed in one way.
so we've already goofed up
Yeah,
and, okay.
yeah. So let's,
So we're not gonna have a chance to go back and do a do-over.
it's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen a different way.
A different way.
I want to work with this a little bit
Okay.
here, and I'm going to pull in an obscure fact and try and tie it into what you're saying, Wanda. So God is hanging his bow in the sky.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay,
work with me on this a little bit. A bow, an arced bow. What do you use something like that for?
Arrow.
An arrow. Okay, it's a weapon, right? A bow is a weapon. God is hanging his bow in the sky. What did he promise not to do? He promised not to destroy. The sign of the covenant is the bow being hung in the sky. I think, and look, the text doesn't say this, but let's read what the symbol of all of this is. God says, I am not going to destroy the world this way anymore. There's God's solution. So why did the flood happen in the first place?
We were bad.
Yes. God looked upon, humanity and saw that, their heart was only evil all the time, and God repented that he had made them. That's what, Genesis chapter 6, that's what caused the flood. So human sinfulness and disobedience and wickedness caused the flood. Then there's the flood. We have recreation. We have Noah now standing in kind of as the new surrogate Adam at that point. The same charge is given, and God's like, I'm not going to do that again, and he hangs his weapon up.
that's cool.
So what I read into this is that God is saying human sinfulness is not going to be handled through the outpouring of divine wrath. That is not going to be the solution to the problem. We tried that, and God says, I won't do it. And what happened? So Noah was righteous, right? The only righteous one among all humans. That's why Noah was preserved. Well, then obviously no sin came into the world after we got rid of, all those other sinners and we kept the good guy, right? Exactly. So we still have that problem, but God said the solution to this problem is not going to be the wrath of God raining upon you. So promise number one, God will never again flood the earth. Creation will not be undone. Human sin is not going to be solved by wrath and destruction. There's going to be a different way.
Now, he didn't say that he wouldn't do it by another means. He said he wouldn't do it by flooding the earth.
But yes, and this is where, it depends on whether or not you want to follow me all the way to symbolically, the covering of the earth and water is essentially taking all of the order and returning it back to chaos. So I read that as, it's standing in for any sort of way you would describe, the destruction, because it's the undoing of creation. This also goes maybe a little bit back to my surprise by hopeness that, I don't believe that eschatologically what's going to happen is the destruction of the planet, but it's the restoration of creation. And that I think you see that through the arc of the Bible. Okay, so that's I'm saying anchor number one, promise of God for Noah. I'm going to go to Abraham now, so the second one. So this begins Genesis chapter 12. So the Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So this is, one of those, many of us have, read this many times, memorized it. Here's the question I want to ask. You're a 21st century person, and you have, the Lord said to me, and then gave a promise like that. Does that feel like a normal or a fantastic kind of experience? I would put it in that category. I'm not going to say that some people don't claim to have those kinds of experiences. Maybe some of you feel like you've had that sort of experience, but it's not something that we think is a typical part of everyday life. All right, I want to ask this question. What might an ancient Near Eastern person say in that case? Remember we talked about their view of the gods and that there was a hierarchy of gods and there were cosmic deities and there were national deities and there were clan deities and that everything was the gods. So if you're Abram, you lived 4,000 or so years ago, and then you have an experience where God is speaking to you, what might be the interpretation of that experience?
Your clan's stronger than everybody else's clan.
Okay.
You did a good job
Oh,
making your God happy.
hey. Wow, I found favor with one of the gods. This is great. My family's got a clan god. This is, actually, I think I'm going to skip through this part right here for a second and get down to the bottom here. So Yahweh appeared to Abram in a way that Abram would understand. Like the idea of a God coming to speak to you and becoming your clan god. Many clans, many families had gods that were personal to their family. And then there were others that were national and others that were cosmic over all of them. So this is idiomatically speaking ancient Near Eastern, if you will. God came in a way that Abram would understand, but didn't start with, okay, so we got to straighten some things out. First of all, it's just me, not the rest of them. And we actually aren't in this sort of symbiotic relationship. Also, I've got some commandments. You're going to need to start following them to avoid wrath. That's not how it started. It started with reaching out and saying, go, leave the land you know, leave your family, go where I will show you, and I will make you a great nation and bless you, make your name great, and you will be a blessing. In other words, trust me. Those are the first things that come from God to a particular people about, well, I should say Noah was involved in that too, so that's not the first. But here Yahweh is revealing himself to Abram and basically saying, I'm asking you to do something and I need you to trust me. And that's how the relationship begins. Yes.
So does that kind of tie into when Rachel took gods from the household? Household gods, they would have been the clan
Yep,
gods
exactly.
for her family.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
And they
This
were
is great.
precious to her family.
Yes.
She took them. And that's
Yep.
why her father came. And-
Yeah, that's right. And so
Okay.
that example right there, Wanda, is perfect
Yeah,
because it shows that this was special
yeah.
for Abram, but it wasn't like I'm the only person in history who's ever had something like this happen. Other families have their gods too. Oh, we remember, them over there, and his great-great-grandfather was visited by, one of these gods, and, we have the temple and we have the idols, and, the temple's going to be small, but, maybe it's even just a room in the house, but that's where the idols are and that's where they do worship. And Yahweh is coming to Abram in a way that is similar to the way that others would have understood that.
Okay.
Except no idols to worship.
Except no idols, correct. We start to see some differences. And in particular, I didn't get to this in here, the biggest difference, and when Abram's gonna know, okay, something's really different,
Yeah,
there's 2 points. One of them we're about to get to, which is the covenant.
okay.
The other one is Isaac. And asking for the sacrifice of Isaac
Yeah,
doesn't make sense even so the idea actually that you would be asked for a child sacrifice
yeah.
in that period of time, that's actually not all that strange. You remember one of the big deals with Moloch, right? They would sacrifice their children to Moloch. Sacrificing children to the gods in that period of time was not a completely unheard of idea. But what was the promise to Abram?
I'll make
You ready?
a nation out of this.
There's going to be a great nation, all your descendants.
Right.
And he's like, hey, hold on. The whole premise of this relationship here was I was going to have descendants. I'm not getting any younger, and I've got one,
Yeah.
and you're taking them away. This doesn't make any sense.
He knew he could revive him, resurrect him if he did go through with it.
And what you start to figure out is that this relationship, this trust that's being built is very different than the great symbiosis relationship. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so Yahweh starts to act differently and progressively reveal, I'm not like these other gods. Things are different.
Just this particular right there is why he's referred to as righteous, because of his faithfulness, not
Mhm.
because of any rules that he was following.
Correct.
So
There were-
grace by faith is
The
through this particular.
Abraham believed God and it was reckoned him as righteousness. So yeah, God doesn't start with law, God starts with a relationship. This is another indulgent theological point. I will make your name great. People get extra credit, bonus points. This section is a contrast with something earlier in Genesis. So God, will make your name great. Is there something earlier where there was names being made great, and by who? Previous chapter, that's my hint. And they said, Genesis chapter 11, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered all over the whole earth. And what does God do to this tower?
Scared them.
Knocks the tower down, scatters them all over the earth. And then Genesis chapter 12, this is how it's going to happen. It's not going to be you and your way. It's going to be me and my way. So that contrast is, I believe, very deliberate between Babel and Abraham. All right, so then Genesis 15. So we're getting into the covenant ratification. So after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me for I continue childless? You've given me no offspring, and so a slave born in my house is to be my heir. But the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, look towards the heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And Abraham believed God, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Okay, I just put all these all together. I'll read the whole thing here, and then we can get through the commentary on it. But after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. And yes, okay, sorry. So then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he, that's God, said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought them, all of these, and cut them in two, laying each half over and against the other. And when the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I give this land. It goes on a bit. And those of you who are following along in your Bible, you notice I skipped a few verses in there just to highlight some things. Okay, so how does this start? This starts with God saying to Abram, hey, so Abram, your reward's going to be great. And Abram says, like I said, so when's the whole offspring thing going to happen? Like I said, I'm not getting any younger. I'm now like in my 90s. This isn't happening. And a slave born in my house will be my heir. This now particularly goes to, in the ancient Near East, if you were elderly and you had no offspring, you would adopt to have your estate pass on. You would pick somebody within your house. That person would be adopted as your child, and then your estate would pass on through that. So Abram seems to think that's what's going to happen here. I'm going to have to adopt, and then that's how this is going to work. Now, Yahweh makes a unilateral promise that Abram's descendants will be as numerous as the stars. And Abram wants to know how. God's response then is a covenant. It's the covenant ratification. So there's no new promises, but this is the guarantee right here. When this covenant ratification happens, Abram sees just how seriously God is promising that this will happen. So this goes back to what we said about the animals. It is deadly serious. And then, like we read, only God, only that flaming torch and the smoking pot go in between the animals, which means only one party is taking the oath.
It's still about trust here, though.
It's still all about trust. there's a promise, and he's just saying, trust me. That's basically the thing that keeps getting said over and over and over to Abram. Trust me, trust me, trust me. Trust me in chapter 12, trust me in chapter 15, trust me in chapter 22 with Isaac. Okay, and so yes, the smoking, fire pot, the flaming torch. Yes, interestingly, a pillar of fire. What I acquire people? Pillar of fire passing through the torch. Where else have we seen a pillar of fire?
Passing through the Red Sea.
Yeah, sometimes it's a pillar of cloud.
Right.
It leads them through the desert. Yep. So this resembles the Shekinah glory. This is the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. Abram would have been familiar with these implements as well. Now, this is before any of those events happened. But these implements were also stood for the gods of ancient Near Eastern religion. So Abram would have had that understanding as well, that the fire and the incense represented the presence of the divine. So promise number 2, through the line of Abraham, the whole world will be blessed. Oh, this people has been chosen to be his vessel for revelation and renewal to the world. Through you, all peoples on earth will be blessed. Any questions about Abram? I guess I didn't stop for Noah questions.
So how does this diverge from the Muslim belief? Because that, in the Muslim belief, that slave son is
Yeah, Ishmael.
there, and
Yep. So up to this point, they're going to track with you the whole way. Yep. So you've got Abraham, we're with you on Abraham. So then you have Isaac and Ishmael. And my understanding of this, I wish it wasn't recorded. Because I could be wrong on this. My understanding is that their belief is that the promise is coming through both the line of Isaac and Ishmael. Because the line of Isaac ends up leading to Jesus. Jesus is a prophet of God in Islam as well. But the descendants of Ishmael also received the revelation of Muhammad. So there are multiple lines, both leading back to Abraham, through which the revelation of God's coming into the world. So that's how I believe it's understood in Islam.
The other thing with that covenant that he made is that if one party breaks the covenant, somebody has to die. And God took that on himself.
If God took that on himself, then is God going to die? Is God going to die?
Well, nobody sends his son.
True.
Life to run the cross.
Yes. So now, at 9:45, I'm getting to crystallize. Joe.
isn't that why this is a covenant and not a contract?
Yes.
Because, I don't know if you're gonna get into that, but
Yeah. God taking the oath.
you put one of those points up there that why is this different,
Mhm.
or one of the 3 things.
Yeah. Why did God use covenants?
The whole reason being here is only one person takes the oath.
Mhm.
You don't need 2 people to take the oath.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's why, yeah.
And that's what happened here.
God makes the oath.
Yep. God made the oath. God's going to make it happen. All right. Davidic covenant. We'll skip it. So this is the last one for the promises. Covenant with David is found in 2 Samuel 7. As I was going through some of my notes from a few years ago, I was reading through them. I was inspired. You know how some books have, a new book comes out and it says praise for this title and it's a bunch of quotes from people. I came across what I'm calling praise for 2 Samuel 7 from some biblical scholars. One of them is calling it the center and focus of Deuteronomic history itself. That's pretty big, important praise. The most crucial theological statement in the Old Testament. Walter Brueggemann, who I believe Pastor Paul cites with at least some regularity, or maybe it's somebody with a similar last name. And then the ideological summit of the Old Testament, the title deed of the Davidic house to rule over Israel and Judah. So with all of this, if you haven't spent a lot of time in 2 Samuel 7, here's some encouragement to go spend some time in 2 Samuel 7. It is tremendously important, even though it comes about midway through the history of Israel. So 2 Samuel 7, I want to go and read some of that here. I could paraphrase this for you, but we might as well read the first few verses. Okay, so when the king, that's David, had settled into his palace, and Yahweh had given him rest on every side from his enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, "Look, I am living in a cedar house while the ark of God sits inside tent curtains. So Nathan told the king, go and do all that is on your heart, for the Lord is with you. So cedar, of course, being incredibly valuable at that time, David's like, I'm living in this beautiful house, and God's living in a tent. And this, historically, this is right after the ark comes into Jerusalem. So it's not like the tent's been there for a couple years, and all of a sudden it dawns upon David, oh my gosh. They just recovered the ark, they just brought it back. And now David's like, this isn't right. And then Nathan, the prophet of God, gives David the green light. Says, yeah, whatever you're thinking, go do it. And then what happens right afterwards, in 4-7, God picks up the phone and calls or Nathan and says, hold on, we gotta go straighten this out. So, but that night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. So Nathan is just like, yeah, whatever's on your heart, David, go do it. And then the word of the Lord comes to Nathan. Go to my servant David and say, this is what the Lord says. Are you to build a house for me to live in? From the time I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until today, I have not lived in a house. Instead, I have been moving around with a tent as my dwelling. In all my journeys with all the Israelites, have I ever asked anyone among the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why haven't you put me in a house of cedar? So then the covenant promises come. So Yahweh's like, I'm sorry, have I ever told you this is a problem? Here are the promises I'm giving you. Listen to my word here. This is what's going to happen. Now, this is what you're to say to my servant David. This is what the Lord of hosts, Lord of heaven's armies, I really like the NLT, says. I took you from the pasture and from following the sheep to be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone. I have destroyed you and all your, not destroyed you. I've destroyed all your enemies before you. I will make a name for you like that of the greatest in the land. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. We're going to go more into the structure of covenants next week. And one of them is you usually begin with the history between the two parties. So that's what's happening here. This is following covenantal form. And then we get to the promise right here. I will make a name for you like the greatest in the land. Make a name for you. What does that sound like?
Abraham.
Yeah, we just talked about that with Abraham. I will establish a place for my people Israel and plant them so that they may live there and not be disturbed again. Establishing a place that they may live. That sounds like land. Where else have we heard a land promise? Abraham. Evildoers will not afflict them as they have done ever since the day I ordered judges to be over my people Israel. I will give you rest from your enemies. That one right there is part of the Sinai covenant blessing. Okay, here we go. This is the specific promises that are part of the Davidic covenant. The Lord himself will make a house for you. And when you're, and house here is being referred to in the figurative sense as in a line, because we're going to get to the proper house in just a bit. So I will make a house of you. When your time comes and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up after you a descendant who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. So that's the defining house right there. He will build a house for my name. Okay, now we're talking about house, the structure. Who built the temple? Solomon. And Solomon was whose son? Yeah. Yes. Good answer. He will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. So the son of Yahweh is going to be the king. Bookmark there. When he does wrong, I will discipline him with a human rod and with blows from others. But my faithful love will never leave him as I removed it from Saul. Your house and kingdom will endure before me forever, and your throne will be established forever. And Nathan spoke all these words in the entire vision to David. So the covenant promises in 2 Samuel 7. So the Lord declares to you, this is the oath statement. I will raise up a son from your own body. So David will have a son. This son is going to build a house for God. And that his kingdom will be established forever. He will be God's son. This is, and this right here, I think, is the central part that makes this so theologically significant. There's the adoptionist language. I will be like a father to him. He will be like a son to me. And I won't remove my loving kindness from him like happened to Saul. We'll skip over that for a bit. And then your house and kingdom will endure before me forever, and your throne will be established forever. So there's this promise that eternally, eternally, the line of David is going to be on the throne ruling, with God as the father to the king. That's what's being promised here. So the parties of the covenant, who are the two people who entered into the covenant here?
David and God.
So yeah, David and God. And who took the oath? God takes the oath. Did David take an oath? No, it's actually, it was sort of just delivered to him. It's like God said, hey, Nathan, go tell David this. And so there wasn't really any interaction between them. So it's very clear there's one party taking the oath. Is there any contingency or quid pro quo? No. So what kind of covenant is it? Yes, promissory. And can God fail to keep his promises? No. Cool, good. You passed. All right, so how can we sum up this promise? So God will have a dwelling place among them. There's going to be the house, and then remember 1 Kings, the Shekinah glory fills the temple. The same cloud that descended upon the tabernacle in Exodus 40 descends at the temple inauguration, 1 Kings 8, I think. So that's similar to Eden and Sinai, I will walk with you and be your God and you will be my people. Leviticus 26 that I read at the beginning. That's part of the Sinai promise as well. God dwelling with his people. God dwelt with his people in Eden. God is dwelling with them in the tabernacle. And then God is saying, I'm going to dwell with you in this place as part of the Davidic covenant. The line of David will rule forever. So similar to Abraham, there's eternal possession of this land by David's line, just like there would be eternal possession of the land, and through you, all nations will be made blessed. And then, God will relate to the king like a father to the son. There's a special relationship. Similar on the Sinai promise of, you will be my treasured possession in the royal priesthood. So these covenants have many similar aspects to them. So I'm going to distill that down to God is going to dwell with his people in their land, and the line of David will rule forever. Those are the two promises there. Anybody uncomfortable with this last one?
Well, it's obviously going to Jesus, because and it was just of Israel at that point, and maybe a little further when they conquered somebody. But the line of Jesus is for the whole world.
Right. So was there an unbroken succession of kings on the throne in Israel after David? Right. Jerusalem is sacked. The Israelites are brought into exile. Now, did God promise this to David? Kind of sounds like it, right? But Ryan, you told us that God's promises can't fail. Yes, I did. So then what do you make of all of this?
Well,
All right.
Isn't it the Abraham thing, all the world will be blessed? I mean, it's just a continuation, reiteration of that same contract, a little more specifically though, with the line of David.
Yes. The issue here though is that it seems like what God promised to David, which is that your son and your house is going to rule forever, didn't exactly go the way you might have thought if you were hearing those words as David. Because the kingdom did fall. And there were hundreds of years where there was not a king in Jerusalem.
But the covenant before that had an if-then.
So
Sinai.
let's look at the way that David and Solomon, we have some, hidden cam audio footage from when David was talking to Solomon on his deathbed about how this was going to go down. So 1 Kings chapter 2, David's last words to Solomon, when essentially this is being passed on. This is going to go right where you were going, Mark. So, as for me, this is David speaking to Solomon. I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong and courageous like a man, and keep your obligation to the Lord your God to walk in his ways and keep his statutes, commands, ordinances, and decrees. When does that sound like? Does anybody know that reference? Be strong and courageous. Keep the book of the law on your lips. Do not stray to the left or to the right. Yep, Joshua chapter 1. This is written in the law of Moses. So interestingly, right, the predicate for what he's saying right here is the Mosaic covenant, the Sinai covenant. He's referring to the law. So this is written in the law so that you will have success in everything you do wherever you turn, and so that the Lord will carry out his promise that he made to me. Okay, so now David is incorporating his covenant with the Sinai covenant here, saying, If your sons are careful to walk faithfully before me with their whole mind and heart, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel.
There's an if.
Oh, interestingly, there's an if. So David, when David is talking to Solomon, so we said there's this promissory covenant, right? But then David's talking to Solomon and he puts an if in there. So how do we make sense of this? So Solomon did fulfill part of this covenant. He was a son from David's own body. He did have his kingdom established. Solomon became king. He did build the temple for God. So those things did happen. There were some other parts that didn't exactly go the way that we would have expected, though. His line wasn't established forever. Indeed, it was Solomon's sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, where the kingdom was split between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And this eventually led to exile. They were going okay for a while, but how did this go awry? So, in the interest of time, so Solomon intermarried with the Canaanites and worshiped their gods. And so 1 Kings 11, the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, who appeared to him twice. Since you have done this and did not keep my covenant, my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. All right, so God promised David that he would have an eternal line on the throne. And then he goes to the first king in the line and says, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. However, I will not do it during your lifetime. Interestingly, because of your father David, I will tear it out of your son's hand. Yet I will not tear away the entire kingdom from him. I will give one tribe to your son because of my servant David and because of Jerusalem that I chose. So he's still saying there's going to be the fulfillment of this promise somehow. God is promising that somehow his promises to David will still come true, even though it's not through Solomon. So what's going on here is exactly, Mark, what you were getting at. There's an interplay. There's multiple covenants going on here. There's the Sinai covenant and there's the Davidic covenant. And breaching the Sinai covenant comes with consequences. And even in 2 Samuel 7, we can see when he does wrong, I will discipline him with a human rod and with blows from others. There is sort of this provision for discipline, even in the Davidic covenant. But it is guaranteed that the line of David is going to rule forever because God did make that promise. So theologically, what we get at here is even though God promised that this will happen, individuals can forfeit their claim to that promise through disobedience. So God promised to David, God didn't promise to Solomon, God didn't promise to Jeroboam, God didn't promise, on down. God will keep the promise somehow, and I'm looking for a particular term that I should have moved up. And so maybe I didn't put it in the slide. This is what would be called conditional but guaranteed. There is a guarantee. God is going to make it happen. Though individuals who breach the covenant through disobedience may forfeit their inheritance to that. We can recall that here Jesus is called the Son of David, right? And for many, if I had more time, I would go into all the reasons why Jesus is considered the Son of David. But this is how God ultimately fulfills this. Jesus being of the line of David, that's one of the more obvious ones. Being the God-man, the eternally reigning Davidic king. So the way that this is ultimately accomplished is Yahweh's kings, the line of David, are going to rule together ultimately through Jesus. So Solomon is the immediate fulfillment of some parts of the covenant. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the remainder of the covenant. Okay, so the last thing, 10, we've got time, because there's only one slide answering this. So why do we think God used covenants? And I put on there, he didn't have to because, well, he didn't. God chose to use this concept of the covenant to relate to people. So this lifelong, unchanging, solemn binding agreement between two parties, where there's a specified ongoing commitment, or else suffer the wrath of God. Like this is the genre that God used to relate to humans. Why choose something like that?
I'd say to prove that he is timeless and can control and is sovereign, I guess is the word.
Okay.
Who is trustworthy?
Trustworthy.
His promises will be fulfilled not by you,
Mhm.
humans,
Mm,
by him.
okay. Yep,
So in other words, you don't have to, if you screw up,
yep,
the promises are still there.
yes. Now-
Because as humans, you will screw up.
Yes, now that's interesting, right? Because there's a contrast there between how the ancients would have thought about it, right? So based on what we've talked about the past couple weeks, so do ancient gods relate to people covenantally? Right, I hadn't said that explicitly.
Basically, not like it.
They're more
Yeah.
punishing.
Exactly. There's this give and take, right? The way that the gods were understood back then, coming to Abram and then coming to Noah, et cetera, is that great symbiosis. Gods have needs, our labor is too great, we make humans, they do some work for us, and then if we like it, we send them storms, and if we're mad at them, we send them bad storms. Blessings here, sort of like you were getting at, are coming from God in exchange for nothing else. The promissory covenant is completely unique, does not occur in the ancient Near East. God is showing his difference and revealing his difference from every other deity that was believed in at the time through these covenants. God does not have needs that need to be met by humans. God is unilaterally conferring blessing to the world. God is working through those people. Through you, all nations will be blessed. You will be a royal priesthood. Through your line, David, there will be rulers forever in the land, along with Yahweh who is present with them. So the covenants established a relationship between God and humans that was fundamentally different than the relationships between any other gods and any other people at the time.
Prompted by love,
I'm sorry?
prompted by love.
Prompted by love, right? And God cared about people, and God was working along with those people. It wasn't a "you're working for me now." That's what we saw last week. You're made. All right, I'm hungry. I'm bored. And if you don't do that, then there's going to be a drought. That's pretty much how the ancient gods worked. Yahweh, on the other hand, is like there is a mission. There is a blessing that's to come into the world. There's a beautiful garden that you get to be a part of, and you get to work alongside me. Remember, name the animals and the significance of that, the created act, that you are my priests, that you are my rulers, that you are the people through whom the blessing will come to the world. And then we remember Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations. This is sort of the promise of the Abrahamic blessing now coming through the new covenant. So God has Yahweh has a very different way of relating to humanity than the ancient gods do. God is loving and promising, no matter what we do, because we're going to screw up, but rather than retribution, there's going to be restoration and renewal.
Glory.
Amen. So, all right, and with that, that's all I have. Are there any other questions? We've got a couple minutes before I got to run to the choir line.
Isn't there a implied covenant with Adam?
Yes, there is kind of an implied covenant with Adam. I leave that one off because it doesn't technically follow the covenant formulation, but there is kind of an implication there. So some people will say the first covenant is the Adamic covenant.
Isn't that more of a result of his sin? Almost like you sinned, so now you're gonna do this. It's kind of like a condition rather than a covenant.
There you sit. Yeah, you would go to the text and say, all right, so from any tree in the garden you may eat, but this one, you will not eat, or you will surely die. Is that an agreement? Is that a prescription or is that a description? So is that just like, this is the case, it's not like I'm entering into a pledge that I will certainly kill you if you eat from this tree? Or is it descriptive, if you eat from this tree, you will surely die? And so that's where there's some semantic, discussion among the scholars. Does this qualify as a covenant or not? The meaning of the text stays largely the same. But yes, you could, I think it's fair to call it that. Anything else? Well, great, thanks. Appreciate you coming out, and you'll be able to make it on time. All right.
Thank you.
Take care, thanks.